Hey guys, so today we're going to be going over our first start to finish in the complete workflow series, and these are for the first time not going to be technique based. It's just going to be absolutely everything that goes into the raw image until the final product. It includes techniques used and taught during all of the first 6 chapters and a few extra little just techniques that I'm going to add in quickly, and just kind of putting it all together so you can really see how to use all of these tools to get the most out of your image. So first thing I'm going to do is just import my photos into Lightroom just so you guys can see everything. And the first photo is going to be one from Peyto Lake. So now that my images are imported, come over to the Develop tab and just look at these images. So you can see my settings up here. For the most part, they're the same. 25 millimeters for all of them, ISO 100 for all of them, f2.8 for all of them, and my shutter speed was 1/25 of a second for this exposure. And I just changed my shutter speed for each photo just to get the most out of it. So for this first photo, I was exposing for the foreground, for Bree in the photo, and just everything kind of down here. But as you can see, it's overexposed in the sky. So my next photo, and this one's kind of the mid-tones. So this one, I won't be using anything from down here. I'll mostly be using the mountain and kind of merging it with this, because in this one the mountain's just a little bit too bright. I'm going to put those together, and this last exposure is the darkest, and you can see this is 1/160 of a second, and this is perfectly exposed for my sky, but everything else is too dark. So what we're going to do is we're going to edit all 3 photos in Lightroom, then we're going to blend the photos, and then we're going to get into all of the creative edits in Photoshop and take it from there from start to finish. So first thing is I'm going to do a base edit on this first photo, and I'm going to sync it across all 3 photos. And then after that, I'm going to go into each photo and see if I need to do any selective edits per photo. So for blending reasons, it will help us if this sky, as close as we can, match this sky for blending. And for this foreground, it will be the easiest if we can try to match it as best we can with this foreground. So they're completely different. So for this one, I'll be bumping up my shadows big time. So the quality will be horrible, but it'll make an easier blend line up here when we do that. And same for the sky. So the sky is darker here. So for this one, we're going to try to darken the sky and the highlights to try and match it, and then when we put it together, it'll just blend a whole lot easier for us. So just going to put a little base edit on. I'm going to really drop those highlights so I can get some detail in the sky. Bring up the shadows a bit. I'm going to actually also bring up the general exposure to about, I'll do a little bit extra. And then I'm going to drop the shadows a little bit because of that. Bring up my whites overall. Drop the blacks. Maybe like stop or 2, no, just 1 stop of clarity. A little bit of general vibrance. And I do notice that my photo is a little bit blue. So this wasn't taken at the exact time of sunset, but since we were in the mountains, it can get, your images can get really cool really fast once the sun dips behind them. And the sun was about over here in actuality, so that's why you can see the lightest part is over here. I'm going to just make this a good bit warmer because I really want the sun to be shining. You can see down here some of these yellows are starting to pop more with all of that. And check a quick before and after by using the backslash key. That looks good. Now I'm going to just do a little S curve. It's too much. Yeah, just that. And the hue, these aquas, I like where they are. I mean, this Peyto Lake is incredible, but I just want to just see where that would take it. Okay, undo that. I'm going to drop my hue of my aquas just 2 stops. Get a little bit, or maybe 3, a little bit richer in there. The greens, I'm going to go up a little bit more towards green, and then I'm going to bring the yellows over a good bit. Some nice warmth there. And then I'm just going to bring up the aquas a little bit, but I know I'm going to saturate this a bit more later, so we'll get to that later. Generally this photo already is a little bit saturated and I want to add a good bit later in Photoshop, so I'm going to take the vibrance back to 0 and still a little bit too blue. So bring that over. That looks good. Don't think I want to do any split toning. Noise reduction, just put up 1 stop in case in any of the photos there's any grain I want to take out just a little bit. Remove chromatic aberrations, enable profile corrections, and when you enable profile corrections it takes the vignette and the warp away, so it actually brightens your images slightly. So I'm going to drop the general exposure to counter that, and that looks good. Before, after. Now I'm going to shift click all 3 photos, going to sync, and everything I need checked is checked. So I'll synchronize. That'll just take a second, and now just kind of sift through these and see how they look. It's pretty good. That's really good. So one thing I noticed is that for merging, I'm gonna need to up the shadows in these second 2 photos, just to make those a little bit closer to. Here, I'll pop this up so you guys can see which one I'm working on. This one's going to be for the mountain, so I'm going to do a little bit more clarity, just to make that really pop. You see before in the first image to after, it's a lot closer to what we want, so that'll help merge better. Doesn't need to be perfect. Now this one, you need to really bump up these shadows, and even the blacks, bump those up. Drop the whites. So let's see that. So you can see the mountain is different in all 3, and obviously the exposures are all different, but they're generally where we want them to be, and it'll be pretty easy for blending. So for this first photo, again, pretty much going to be taking the lake and below out of this photo. And then on the second photo, we're going to merge this mountain exposure with this mountain exposure, a little bit more detail, a little bit more depth, and then this last photo, we're going to be using just the sky for. So I'm pretty happy with all of those. So I'm going to highlight them all, edit in, open as layers in Photoshop. Okay, so now that our photos are loaded in Photoshop, you can see the brightest exposures on top, the mid-tone exposures in the middle, and darkest on bottom. For just purposes of kind of how I do it, I actually like the lightest to be on the bottom, so I'm just going to move these around so I have my darkest on top, then mid-tone, then my bright exposure. Now I'm going to highlight all 3 of these before anything. So some of these were at a short shutter speed and Bree was standing, so you know when someone is in your frame, like naturally they're going to move slightly. And on top of that, I was using a tripod, but I think it's kind of windy, so my tripod may have moved the slightest. So I just want to auto align this to make sure everything, you know, kind of just came out fine. So I'm going to go to edit, auto align layers, auto, and just let that run. And you can see when you auto align layers, you get this little kind of band around your photo, and what that is it's Photoshop kind of taking your photos and putting them together. So it's going to be aligning them horizontally and vertically, and on top of that, for areas that may have gotten shifted in a weird way, it's going to actually slightly stretch and warp your image to make sure that they are perfectly aligned. So now when you kind of take this layer away, you can see everything is the same, and you can see Bree's moving, but that's because she was moving. But as far as the mountains and stuff go, everything is perfectly aligned. So first step is I'm going to hide these layers, have my base layer, and as I said before, what I want to do is bring in the mountains and just merge them kind of between these 2 layers. So I don't want to just take these mountains and put them on, I'm just going to merge them with this. So for this layer, I'm going to make a layer mask for it, and then on the layer itself, I'm going to be making a selection of the mountains. Just rough, just kind of clicking and dragging and letting the quick selection tool do its thing. And then I'm just going to come and make sure it gets all of this. And you could come up to this select and mask to make it perfect, but for what we're doing, I don't think it's too necessary, since we're going to be just kind of blending the 2 together roughly. Make sure it just gets what you want. So to take things out, like this, when it goes over, you're just going to be doing Option or Alt and clicking. So that'll be the opposite of making your selection. and just click to add that. Option click to take this part away, and just refine this as good as you think you need to. Sometimes you really need to be perfect and take it into select and mask and do a really good job, but sometimes you really don't need to do all that much. So now I'm going to click over to my layer mask. This mountain's a little bit too dark, and it's showing this exposure right now, and it's not showing any of this. So this is the lighter exposure, this is the mid-tone exposure, but it's just a little too dark. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to brush out some of the opacity of this mountain to kind of have it merge with the layer below it. So I'm going to put my opacity to just say 50, make a big brush, just do a few passes. Undo that, and that right there looks pretty good. I'm going to drop it to 20 and do one more pass. I think that looks perfect. So I'm going to do Command D to deselect. Now I'm going to look at the before and after. It's before, that's after. Alright, now I'm going to make a selection of kind of everything below the mountain. Got all of it. I'm going to take a black brush, add 100% opacity because I don't want any of this mid-tone dark layer to come up on this foreground. I just wanted it to affect the mountains. So now I'm just going to brush that out, and what is below is now our lighter exposure. Going pretty rough over this, but exposures are close enough, and because we edited them to be very close, it's going to be merging pretty easily. So I'm going to do Command D to deselect. You can see our before and our after. Before, after. So it's very, very subtle, but what we did with this second layer is we kept the foreground with Bree in the lake to be the bright exposure. You can see when I turn this on and off, if you're just looking under this lake, nothing has changed, and it looks really good. And now if we're looking at this mountain, it's subtle, but you can see it gets just a little bit darker and a little bit more depth, and that's because we merged the mid-tone layer with our bright exposure. And before, when we did the merge of the second layer, you can see we had the really bright sky from the bright exposure. But when we turn this on in our layer mask, it actually left this. So now the sky is the mid-tone layer, and it's going to make it even easier to blend with the dark layer because it's not going to be starting from here. We already have some nice detail in the sky, and then this will just bring in the rest of it. One thing I do notice is it's mainly this tree. I'm going to go back on this layer mask. I'm going to take a brush. It's like a 10% opacity. There's a line, and that's from the different exposure values. So that's kind of a clear giveaway. So I'm just going to kind of feather this in and brush it together so it's not really noticeable. Because on the lake to trees, you can kind of get away with it because it's already a natural line, and that's kind of the border. And you can blend the exposure much easier. But right here when the tree kind of goes in, you can see there's a clear line that we missed. So I'm just taking a 10% brush, just kind of going over the tree. Just kind of making this a little bit more seamless. I'm going to click X, kind of go over this with white. I'm going to bring up the opacity to like 40, just make it a little bit more visible and apparent. X to switch my brushes, and now that blends a lot more nicely. This tree looks fine, I don't see any blending errors. This one looks fine. I think the rest of these look fine. It was mainly just that one tree. You can see the before, after, before, after. And now I don't think you can kind of notice anything. Alright, so now that we have these photos merged, our last step to blend the photos is going to be to bring in the sky exposure. I'm going to turn this layer on. I'm going to put a layer mask on it. I'm going to invert it so none of it shows up. All I want to focus on is the sky. So I'm going to be taking a white brush at 100% opacity, and I am just going to be painting white onto this black layer mask. That's going to be bringing in this sky exposure. And I'm going to come over to this, not the layer mask, I'm going to make a selection of the sky, make it pretty rough, get that out of there. Okay, that looks good. Come back to my brush. Now I can get the lower area, just bring in all of that. Okay, now that looks good. I'm going to do Command D to deselect. But now, as you notice, you can see there's a clear line above these mountains where we're putting in the sky. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a smaller brush, right there, put this at 20% opacity, and I'm just going to be feathering this together between going back on a white brush and a black brush just over the border, and it'll feather it a lot nicer. It'll go into the sky and into the mountains just a little bit. I'm going to go a little bit bigger. I'm just going to do a few passes on the white brush. Then I'm going to click X to switch to my black brush. Do the same thing, just do a few passes. X, and I'm just going to be going back and forth, blending these together and feathering these together. Alright, I think that looks much better. So now that we have all three of our layers blended and seamlessly together as if it were one single exposure, now I'm going to show you the before, our lightest exposure. Then we brought in some of the midtones. Then we have our sky exposure, and all of them are blended very well. So at this point, every layer you make in Photoshop is going to increase your file size, which will slow your computer down and take a lot more out of your RAM, so it'll slower your workflow. So if you can flatten your image, all of this file and data and size and all of that stuff, if you don't need to come back, if you're like, you know what, I blended these perfectly, I'm not going to have to come back, like there's nothing else I need to do, then you should flatten your image. I don't always do this. The only time I'll ever really flatten an image is when I'm blending exposures, because all of this is file space that I don't need to come back to. I'm very happy with how these blended, and I don't think there's anything else I need to do. So you can come up here to flatten your image, and this help search bar is really awesome, because if you ever know a tool that you use and sometimes you're like, oh man, I just can't remember where it is with all of these tabs, just search it and you can find it. So yeah, you're going to come down here to flatten your image. As you can see, layer, flatten image. Also, if you have the Tony Kuiper Luminosity Mask, there's a shortcut, so just flatten. And now we have our base image. I recommend this, and you can, if you saw down here, our file size is about 500 plus megabytes. Now it's 137. So it really is a nice little tool. It'll save you on file size, and just do it if you can, and if you know you don't need to go back into your image. So I'm going to unlock my background layer, and now we need to adjust the image to get these crop lines out of here. So I'm going to do Command T to free transform. I'm just going to pull this up in every direction. And the reason I'm not cropping it is because if you crop an image and then go to print it or use it for anything, your kind of orientation for your image is going to be completely off. But if you just free transform and stretch it like we just did, your image will still be the same size. It'll still be, you're not going to have to do any custom print frames or anything like that. And you just can kind of stay on the same kind of orientation. It just makes things easier. So now that I have my image all blended, what I want to do is I want to intensify this image and kind of add some mood to it. So now that everything's blended, I'm going to come up to Camera Raw Filter. I'm going to copy this layer. So I'm going to do Command J, because I always want to be able to see the before and after. So now I'm going to come up to Filter, Camera Raw Filter, and just get this a little bit more where I want it to be. So I still want it to be a bit warmer, just a little bit. I'm going to bring the highlights down, shadows up just a touch, whites up, blacks down a little bit, and I think that looks really good. I'll click OK. Before and after, that definitely helps with the nice warmth. And before I kind of get into any creative edits, if I want to do any warping, I'm going to try to do it first, just so I have the image looking what I want it to before I actually get into the colors, mood, and tone and everything. So now I'm going to do Merge Visible Layer, Command Option Shift E, and that'll make a fresh layer. So this will just say, I'm going to name all my layers. Added Warmth, Blended Base Image. I'm going to call this Warp 1. And I don't want to affect the foreground or anything, so I'm going to make a selection. Alright, so I just want to include the sky and the mountain. The sky I don't really care to warp, but it'll make it easier for blending the mountain itself. Just kind of fix this up. Alright, now I'm going to come up to Edit, Transform, Warp, and what I want to do is I want to make this mountain look bigger than it actually is. I don't want to touch any of these bottom squares. I really just want to be messing just with up here, because I also don't want to have to fix any blending down here. So I'm going to push these mountains together actually just by kind of scooting them back and forth, and when they're pushed together it'll actually make them appear bigger than they actually are, and on top of that I am going to stretch them up a little bit. Alright, so I'm just going to push these together. I'm going to try and stay in these top box. I'm going to pull these up, pull this up. I'm going to push this down just a touch. And this is all personal preference. I think that looks pretty good. Click Enter, deselect so I can just kind of see what we did. I'm going to do before and after. So that just really adds and makes that mountain look really nice and tall and adds a nice little effect to it. So very happy with that. But now with warping we need to make sure nothing got messed up here. There is like a little layer here that got taken slightly out, and I'm not the biggest fan of that, and it was actually pushed down, so we don't need that to be pushed down. So I'm actually going to layer mask this warp layer. I'm just going to brush this and kind of get it back to where it was initially. Layer mask, take a black brush. I'm actually going to do this at 100% opacity, and we just need this to blend so it looks seamless. So even if it takes it like right here, we need to fix that. And it's going to be pretty easy in these tree areas because they're so high textured that those will blend together really quick and really easily. Areas like this, we just want to make sure it looks good. So just going to fix this. And right there, like, you just need to make sure everything when you're blending comes in seamless. So these trees blend super easily. And this will just kind of make sure this stays true to the image, and right there. So as long as you blend this where it's seamless, there's not going to be any problem and no duplication. So like right here, even when the trees go over Bree's head, like you can't have that. So now we're just fixing this. High texture areas are super easy to blend, so this is blending super easily. Alright, much better. So now let's do one more. Before, after, and you can see down here wasn't even touched, just the mountain is much bigger. I'm really happy with how that looks. So I'm going to make one more merge visible layer, Command Option Shift E, see before everything, after, just to keep tabs on our photo. One thing I'm going to do is I want to bring some more warmth into the sky. So I'm going to just make a quick selection of the sky. Now come up to camera raw filter. Just kind of bring in a touch of warmth. And magenta. Here to the basic, and those look like oranges. I'm going to just bump those up. Bump up the yellows. Sky looks a little greenish in the area, so I'm going to bring that magenta up even more. Yeah, there we go. There's the before and after. Also going to bring up the dehaze. That'll help richen some of those colors. Click OK. Now Command D to deselect. See that before and after. Yeah, that looks really nice. Okay, I'm gonna call this. Alright, make one more merge visible layer. Command Option Shift E, and I'm gonna make a copy of this. So Command J. So we'll call this merge visible 1, and this we're gonna call Orton. So there's this cool thing called an Orton effect that can really add a nice dreamy effect to your photos. So what you're essentially doing is blurring the image and bringing back some texture. So when you blur the image, you get this really soft, hazy, dreamy look. And then when you bring back texture, it brings the photo back to reality and brings the texture back where it should be. So I have this merge visible. These out of here. And on the Orton layer, what I'm going to do is go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and for this, on my Orton effects, I go a little heavy on them, so I go between 40 and 50 on the pixels. Just do around 45, click OK. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this layer, drop it to, let's say, 15% opacity, see how that looks. Do 16% opacity. You can see this kind of just hazy look it adds to your photo. When you do that, it also takes away some of the contrast and depth to it. If you do a levels adjustment down here, it is going to be for your entire photo. But if you have the layer selected and come up to image adjustments, it's just going to be affecting this layer. So that's really, really important. So I'm just going to bring back some of this contrast, bring in some of those blacks, bring in some of those highlights back. Okay, so now that kind of brought that back a bit. It still has this really, really nice hazy look, but I don't want that to affect everything. So I'm going to layer mask this, and I'm just going to brush it out where I don't want it. I should do this at a 50% opacity brush so there's no harsh edges or anything. And I know that I want Bree to not be blurred at all, so I'm going to give her a few passes. Okay, now she's popping and standing out of this image, I think. These rocks in the foreground, I'm just going to give them one pass. I want them to have a good bit of detail. And these mountains I want to have some nice detail, so I'm going to give those just a pass. And then these trees and water, kind of like the little haziness it adds to it, as same with the sky. Just going to check the before and after. I think that looks really nice. Just give her one more, just make sure. Okay, I'm going to do Command Option Shift E for merge visible 2. And now see our before of the whole photo, after. And one thing that I find distracting about this photo is this little bush. Takes away from the foreground, and since the sun was over here, casting some really nice light on these trees and on these rocks, and then this bush just kind of distracts you from that. So the light is just going like this, and I just want to take this out. So I'm going to do a background layer, Command J, and I'm just going to do clean up. I'm going to use my lasso tool to make a selection around this, then Control click, fill, See how well content aware fill does. Command D to check it out. Not my favorite, so I'm going to undo that and deselect it. Now what I'm going to do instead is use the clone stamp tool. So you can see there's a lot of rocks here, and there's a lot of little rocks and dirt here, so we need to make sure that that merges together. So I'm going to clone stamp an area from here and just kind of undo those. Make sure my opacity is at 100. Bring in some of these rocks. And just kind of pick areas. Make sure that there's a nice edge from them. I think that looks much cleaner. So we'll do before, after. And one thing you need to be careful of when you're doing clone stamping is duplicates, because that gives it away. So this little branch right here and these double rocks, that's a duplicate, and I don't want people to notice that. So I'm just going to take one of them out. Since it's such a high textured area, those, blend really, really easy. So do before, after that. That looks good. Make merge visible. Command Shift Option E. Get rid of this. So call this mood. And I want to really showcase the light and the direction of the image. And I want to direct where the viewer looks when they look at this image. So I'm going to be light bleeding in a little bit in here. Bring the light really shining through here. Me affecting Bree and these trees over here, and over here in the sky, but over here not much going on. So I'm going to darken that, and down here not much going on. So you can see the layer below. I'm going to do sort of a vignette, but I'm going to do a very selective vignette, and this is going to be really nice because it's just going to help us direct the viewer when they look at this. So I'm going to come up to Camera Raw Filter. I'm going to take graduated filter, and zero all of this. Alright, so now just want to darken the areas that people don't necessarily need to be looking at. And just slightly. And I'm going to do it up here as well. And now let's look at the before, after. I think that just helps, even just that little bit. Click OK. Call this actually mood/vignette. Make another merge visible. Command Option Shift E. And now I'm going to start doing all of the dodging and burning. Before, we'll see one last before and after of this image. And first thing I'm going to do is make a dodge burn layer. So I'm going to do Option, click Create a New Layer, and I'm going to bring this over to Soft Light Blend Mode, fill with Soft Light Neutral Color. And this is how I dodge and burn, and we went over it in a previous chapter. This is just kind of a better way than using these tools over here. We're actually going to be brushing it in on a 50% gray layer. Through a series of dodge burn layers, what I want to do is I want to brighten up this water and really add some more color to it. These trees, you can see some nice ambient light on the sides of them where the sun was hitting it. So I want to exaggerate that. I want to exaggerate the warmth on the rocks from the sun. And I am going to light bleed in here because the sun was just over here. And kind of just overall really make this photo moody and dreamy. So first thing I'm going to do is on my first dodge burn layer, bring up my color picker tool, pick the water. It's right there. I want to brighten it up a bit. So I'm going to bring that up maybe a little bit over to less saturated, maybe like there. Click OK. And now on maybe 15% opacity, you can come in here. That's a little bit too dark, maybe like there. So you can come in here and brush around how you want to do it. And you can come in here and be really fine with it and kind of make sure you get in these trees properly. But to show you guys how awesome these luminosity masks are, I'm going to be doing something, I'm going to be dodging and burning with them like we did in the dodge and burn chapter, and just to kind of show you how valuable that this can be. So pull up my rapid mask, and instead of sourcing what you want selected by the lights and darks, you can actually do it by the color too. So I'm going to try and target the cyans. And that did a really good job of picking up this water. But I am going to modify it with the levels. So, because I don't want any of the sky, I don't want any of the mountain. Already the foreground's all black, which is good, but I want the mountains as well to be. I'm going to bring that over so you can see just the water is selected. And now to make sure it gets all of it, I'm going to bring this slider over to brighten those. And that looks great to me. So I'm going to click OK. I'm going to output this as a selection. I'm going to call it Lake Selection. Click OK. And now in my channels, I'm going to run this lake selection by dragging it onto these square selection lines. Just click OK. Disregard that. Now on this dodge burn layer, make my brush really big. I put this at really fast, just at 100% opacity to show you how I can just brush over this as many times as I want, and it's just going to be affecting the water. And you can see in here, it's just touching the water. So I'm going to undo that. I want this, maybe 15 is a little too little, so maybe 25% opacity. I'm going to make this even brighter actually. And because we have just the water selected from the luminosity mask, I'm just going to brush over this really, really roughly because it's not going to be affecting anything else. Now, see the before and the after. So that just really helps like amp up that water. So to show you also exactly what the luminosity mask does is when we target the cyan colors, as we did, this is what our mask looks like. So it's just affecting what was targeted, and it's really, really does a good job at it. So call this merge visible 3. Oops. Call this water dodge. Make one more merge visible layer. Option click. Come to soft light. 50% gray. Now I'm going to target the greens for the trees. Did a pretty good job, but it's missing some of them back here. But these were the ones I wanted to mainly focus on. I'm going to come up with the levels, make sure I get all these darks out of here, and bring up these midtones, bring those up. And I'm going to take a black brush, I'm going to take a black brush, just kind of 100% opacity, make sure this mountain doesn't get touched up here, just where we want it. Run this as a channel, call this trees selection. Okay, I'm going to run this selection. Okay, and then bring up my color picker tool, pick a lighter point of these trees, and just bring that up. And I don't want that to be too saturated, so I'm going to put it around there. And 25% opacity. Could even bring up this opacity a bit to like 50, since we're just touching that selected area. Let me show you guys what this looks like. We can turn all this stuff off. So that just really helps. Before the trees and after, just really brings in some nice color to those. This trees dodge. And the benefit of these luminosity masks is everything we just did, you can do without Luminosity Mask, but you would just have to kind of come in here and dodge every single leaf on its own. So that kind of saves that step there. I'm going to do Command D. There's some selection lines that were up. Those out of here. Make one more. This water dodge, I think we could actually do another one of those. Really bring that up. Drop that opacity to like 75. So now that water really gets touched nicely. Now the big thing we're going to do is going to light bleed, and it's going to affect the entire image, but it's going to bring a whole another depth to it. So I'm going to make one more merge visible layer. Alright, I'm going to grab our color picker tool. I'm going to pick this color light, see what comes up. Pretty orange. I want this to be pretty bright. I'm going to make it more like the color of like a nice sunset coming in. So right there, a little bit yellowish orange, maybe a little bit more down, yep. Click OK. Put this in a 15% brush. And to light bleed, we're just going to be making circular motions here. And that's going to be our sun coming in. Just going to do. Okay, so once you do that to a certain point, it's not going to do anything anymore, because you can see here it's reached its full kind of color potential there in that corner. So I'm going to make one more dodge burn layer. One thing I noticed from this first one is that that's pretty saturated. So for this one, I'm going to bring that saturation down quite a bit just to show the light. I'm going to do a few more passes over here where the sun would be coming in, and then I'm going to bleed this everywhere into our image by just making strokes through the image. Few more bigger circular passes. I'm going to undo a few of those last circle passes, change the color to a bit more yellow. Some of those were kind of orange. Alright, so I think that looks really good. But when you do this light bleed technique, it does get into your shadows and kind of washes out your image. So we need to go back in and layer mask the shadows out, because we just want it to be bleeding on the lighter parts. So I'm going to take these two layers, I'm going to group them together. I'm going to call this our light bleed. And then I'm going to put a layer mask on it. The black brush at around 25% opacity. We just don't want it to touch our areas that are shadow. Brush in these darker part of the trees which don't need the light bleed, because we just want to be touching the ambient parts of it and the outside edges of it. I'm going to come in here, and you can be as fine with this as you want, and it's going to take some time, but if you really come in here and just kind of, it's too high of an opacity, put that back to like 12, just come in here, kind of get some of these shadows back to life. It'll just help take that washed out effect and kind of make it not look washed out. It'll bring the photo back to life, but it'll still have that really cool light bleed effect. So let's look at this. Before, after. I'm going to drop the overall opacity because it's a bit too heavy. I think that might look better. Let's see the before, after. I think that looks pretty good. Get a few passes in here. It's just a little bit much over the mountains. Just do some general passes to gradient, kind of drop this opacity. So I'm pretty much just playing around with different levels of opacity to kind of make it so this bleeds into our photo but is still realistic. See that before, after. So I think that comes in really nice and just kind of gives the image an overall really nice glow. And even put this at 75. Now I'm going to do one more merge visible, Command Option Shift E. This merge visible 4. I'm going to hide all of these. So now we're going to look at our before of the whole image to after. So this has come a very long way, definitely. One thing I do notice is that the image is a little too bright overall for my liking, and the light bleed brought in a lot of light, so I really want to make sure we can bring back some of the darks and the mood that I wanted to portray. So I'm going to copy this layer, just call this added contrast. Come up to camera raw filter. And the shadows, I'm just going to darken those. I'm going to bring up some contrast. Some clarity. Just a little bit of clarity. And the highlights, still going to bring up. So look at that, before, after, yeah. And the general exposure I'm just going to drop. I think that looks pretty good, just kind of fine tweak it. A little too dark down here now, but I really like what it did up here. So I'm just going to click OK. And then I'm going to layer mask and kind of brush out down here where I don't quite like how it touched the image. Nice, to 100% opacity. And also I want these trees to have that nice ambient light as well. Okay, now bring a 50% opacity brush and just kind of blend that in so it looks a little bit more seamless. Here we go. And down here, I don't need that to be brightened, so I'm going to brush that little bit. Darkness and editing we just did back into these bottom parts of the rocks. Alright, and now you can kind of see the direction of light up here, and it kind of leads you into looking at Bree in this lake. I really like the direction of how it's coming along. So I'm going to do merge visible. See before, after, and I really want, as I keep talking about this direction of light and where the viewers should be looking, I want them to be looking at Bree, this lake, and these mountains right here, and the light kind of hitting them. Don't want anyone up here or up here, so I'm going to actually burn in parts of the image, and I'm going to do that with a dodge burn layer. I'm going to put my color to black and add a very light opacity brush, 8% maybe. I'm just going to darken the areas that I don't want the viewer to be focused on. And this will also really add in some nice mood by darkening it. Just give this a few passes. You know, if you think you went a little too heavy, which I think I might have, I'm just going to drop that maybe 70%. Yeah, I think that looks nice. And I'm gonna make merge visible. Call this vignette direction of light before I move forward. On this new merge visible, just want to keep on playing with camera raw filter to kind of get the mood where I want it to be. And I'll bring up this camera raw filter 100 times in an image just to really tweak it little bits and pieces till I get it where I want. This exposure, generally, I'm going to drop. I'm going to bring up the whites. But it's a little too contrasty, so I'm also going to drop the contrast. Look at that, before and after. The clarity, I'm going to drop actually a little bit this time. That looks better. Now I'm going to come in here, play with the HSL tab. And these greens are a little bit warm because of the light bleed, so I'm going to kind of bring back some of the greener parts to that. And make sure this lake is still popping. I want this photo to be really, really dreamy once we're done with it. So I'm just going to keep playing with these sliders till I get something that I'm happy with. Bring down that. The yellow's luminance a bit too. The orange is just a touch. I'm going to saturate the greens even a little bit, but I think they need to be even a bit more green. And we can probably bring up the luminance of those. That might look nice. See how that looks. Yeah, let's do quite a bit on that. Alright, so let's look at this before and after. That looks pretty good. The contrast maybe dropped a little too much. Just check this. Do a little bit overall dehaze too. That looks pretty good. I'm gonna click OK. And call this camera raw. Touch ups. Now before our whole image and after. So I'm showing you guys the before and after quite often, but it's kind of just to keep tabs on your photo, see where you started and where you wanted to take it, and kind of where it's at every step along the way. And I'm super happy with this. It's really dreamy. It's very moody. It's almost like, for if you didn't ever travel and you've never seen a picture of this place, it's like, wow, how does this place possibly exist? So I think it's really cool all in all. This watercolor, we definitely kind of amped up a bit, but it's really, I mean, incredible looking in person. It looks like this in person. And the sunset kind of just really exaggerated that and added some mood and darkening the sky, and breeze really popping because we had that brightest exposure, so she was really properly exposed. I think when we cleaned up these rocks, I think just everything looks really, really nice. So going forward, we're getting close to where I want with this image, but down here in these rocks, I really want to kind of just bring those up, bring up some more. So I'm going to make another dodge burn layer. And I'm going to see what color comes up about there. Let's see. I'm going to bring about there. I don't want it to be too saturated. I'm going to bring it maybe like there. Grab a brush, just like 10% opacity. And you can do as much to these rocks as you want, or as little to these rocks as you want. It's going to be really subtle, but it's going to be a nice little before and after. It's going to really kind of just bump up the ambient light touching these rocks. So you can spend as much time doing this as you want, or as little time as you want, but whatever you do will kind of show through after. For these rocks, I'm just going to do kind of some general passes over them rather than just individual rocks, because there are so many of them. but just the general lighter areas I'm just going to touch. Since we're at a light opacity brush, it'll come through pretty easy, and there's not going to be any weird blend lines or anything. I'm not going to touch down here because I wanted that dark for a reason. Just get this general area. Alright, so let's look at that before, after. That's super, super subtle. And I'm even going to actually take a big brush and get one more pass just on this top layer to really kind of accentuate that. You can look at this before, after. I think that looks really nice. Blend this in a 5% opacity, just blend it into this darker area a little bit easier and cleaner. That looks pretty good. We'll call this Rocks Dodge. One more merge visible. It's a huge before and after. There is one thing I want to fix with Breeze Pants. I really want that color to shine because it's really nice and contrasty to the entire image as a whole. So I'm going to Command J to make a copy of this layer. Call this Merge Visible 6. Call this Pants. The camera raw filter. And I'm just looking at the pants. I'm not going to look at anything else in the image. Bring the saturation of these reds up. Maybe a little bit of the magentas. Nope, not really. Oranges maybe? No. Bring up the luminance of these. Yeah, that'll make those really, really pop. And this red is only really in her pants and nowhere else in the image, but just in case there's any tiny hues of red anywhere else, I don't want anything else affected but the pants. So I'm going to layer mask this. I'm going to do Command I to invert it, so nothing of that edit is shown on the entire image. And now I'm just going to brush in white, just where we want it on the pants. Put this at like 100% opacity brush. And now we're just getting that edit where we want it. We can just color these and brighten these up. And then the rest of the image, in case there is any bit of red, just none of it's getting touched. And these are really making that pop. And that just adds a really cool contrast to the image. It is a little bit much, so I'm going to drop that to like 80. See that before, after. One more merge visible. And over here, there's like the nice light coming in, but not as much color as I wanted. So I'm going to see if maybe I can just bring in some color. Let's zero this. And let's just see if we can do anything here. That looks good. Click OK on that. I'll layer mask that, invert it. I'm just going to brush in just the slightest bit of that where I want it, and just at like a 35% opacity, just to bring in some extra color right there. I may even be too much. Yeah, just a nice little extra color to all of that glow. Bring it in here too. Yeah. That looks good. Call this Added Sun Warmth. Merge Visible. And I'm gonna actually do one more Orton effect to really kind of make this even more dreamy than it already is. So I'm gonna do Command J to background this. I'm gonna call this Orton 2. Same thing, come up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. I'm gonna do a lot less pixels since I already did this. I'm just gonna get just a little bit. 20, drop this opacity like 15. And then come up to image adjustments, bring back some of the dullness that weren't affected. And I just want to layer mask out where I don't want it. Don't want it to 50%. Don't want it to get brie at all. It's the top part of these rocks. I want to make sure those are in texture. And these peaks. Let's see that before and after. That added a nice little touch. So one last merge visible layer. Call this merge visible 8. And as you can see, we have quite a bit of layers. Bring that up so we can see more of them. Do a official before and after. So I'm extremely happy with this. This was 3 different exposures. We aligned the layers, we blended the exposure, we warped the image to our liking, we added a lot of mood and color, we kind of made this a really dramatic and dreamy feel, almost mystical, if that's the right word, and just kind of out of this world. And that's really what I wanted to go for with this image. And we used all of the techniques from the first six chapters, from Lightroom to Adobe Camera Raw, to dodging and burning, to creative warping, blending exposures. We didn't use focus stacking, but we used everything. And this is how you can use all of these different techniques in one photo, and you can really get a lot out of your photo. Like you can see before and after is huge. And when you shoot raw images and you properly expose your images, you plan ahead of time to take a bright exposure, a mid-tone exposure, and a dark exposure. You can put these together with the right techniques and really amp up your photos. So I hope this helped. This is one of my all-time favorite images I've ever taken. I've processed it a few times actually, and generally for the most part I end up with a result like this or very similar to this. If you have any questions, or if there's anything you didn't quite understand, or you just want a little bit more background on a certain technique or thing I used in this, feel free to shoot me an email, shoot me a message on Instagram. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help, or if you're having a tough time applying any of these techniques to a photo of your own, send it over and I would be happy to help. I hope this tutorial helped, and thank you for kind of just supporting me and getting this complete workflow. I'm going to process 2 more images, kind of start to finish, and I'm using a lot of similar techniques, but every single photo is different, all lighting is different, compositions are different, and it's going to be very similar techniques, but the more you see it, and the more you see all this stuff applied, the easier it is to apply it to your own images. So, thanks guys.